welcome everyone. And I'm glad that Laura is doing fine in Texas and she's able to be here. We were a little bit worried last week that you are fine and your dad is okay. So we continue to send our good thoughts and best wishes to friends and families in Texas at this time, absolutely. But, you know, we are in a very good place and a very interesting place with our UDO, because the comprehensive plan continues. And the outcome of that obviously will influence the work we're doing here. But once again, I want to thank all of you for your diligence, your consistency in attending, and not only attending, but also participating and making full, you know, comments and really getting into it. We appreciate that. I think it will benefit not just all of us, but all our entire city as well. So once again, just want to say thank you, and hopefully you stay safe. You know, stay safe and stay well. But I'll turn it over to Tony, and really want to say thank you also to our team, both our staff team and also our consultant team, but more importantly to Tony for his leadership and guiding us through this. And I think that at the end of the day, we all look back and really appreciate this particular time, you know, that we are spending together. Once again, thanks, Tony. I'll hand off to you.
Thank you, Taiwo. And I'll be brief, but ever since we started talking about this, I don't know, at least 7+ years ago, when I was on the Planning Commission, I said then and I said now that the process and how we do the process of this is so important, and that it needs to be inclusive and transparent and rigorous. And here we are, you know, years later with our eye on the finish line, and credit to the team, to Laura and Alan and your team, and Taiwo and your whole group, and Arista and your team for doing that, you know. And when you have a good process like that, you get a good result. And so thanks to all of you all on the committee for sticking with it and engaging and staying engaged. A milestone today in that the overlay and special purpose topics we're talking about today are sort of the last of the district topics before we move into other points. Nice milestone. I think the team will go over the calendar later on, maybe towards the end of the call. I know we're aiming to get a public draft out in May. Although I think we will, you know, continue to see earlier drafts of parts of the ordinance as a committee, and then of course after that public draft comes out, we'll be able to continue to engage and have input and comment on the drafts and this process. So again, thank you everyone, and for all that you're doing and all that you continue to do and all that you will do. So with that, Alan, Laura, you're up.
Thank you, Tony. Today, as Tony mentioned, we'll be covering overlay and special purpose zoning districts. And again, as usual, before we continue, just to review, we are recording this for our YouTube channel, and we will post the recording and additional materials and send that to you next week, as we usually do. And again, to go over our meeting procedures, we will have some staff working in the background to look at your chat questions or comments, and we will stop at the end of our slides and open it up for a broader discussion. But please use the chat feature if you have comments or questions as we go through the slides. And at some point, we may be able to stop and address some questions. But if we don't do it during the presentation, we will definitely do it at the end and hopefully have a response to your questions. Be a little patient with that. I know our staff is trying to multitask and read your questions and provide responses while at the same time paying attention to what we're doing. So we'll go with that. So overlay districts, let me just cover what an overlay district is for those of you who may not be familiar with them or may need a refresher. Overlay districts are zoning districts. We apply them over whatever existing zoning may already be on the ground. And the little snippet I've put on this slide is in the green shading represents the Fourth Ward Historic District, which is an overlay district. But you can also see that there are different zoning districts that are kind of underneath that overlay district. So we use the historic district overlay, and it has its own boundaries, and then we set it down over the top of whatever zoning is already on the ground. The overlay district may grant additional or different uses than what might be permitted in the underlying zoning district, or it may apply additional development requirements in addition or to replace the development requirements of the underlying districts. And we usually or do use overlay zoning districts to support our policies. For example, the policies that are being developed in the comprehensive plan or other city policies that have already been adopted. And finally, we can use overlay districts on top of both conventional and conditional zoning districts. So if you, for example, you have a CD district, a MUD CD, for example, which we have a lot of, or an optional district, we can also use our overlay districts on top of those existing zoning districts. So the districts that we'll talk about today are the historic district overlay, the neighborhood character overlay. We talked a little bit about that concept a couple of meetings ago when we were talking about our neighborhood 1 residential districts, but we've been working a little bit more on that neighborhood character overlay. And so we've got kind of an updated presentation on that. And then we have a couple of manufactured home districts. One is the manufactured home overlay district, and the other is the manufactured home park district. Arista will talk about both of those. And finally, an airport noise disclosure overlay district. And I want to recognize that Stuart Hare from the airport is here in our meeting today. And so if we do have any airport questions, Stuart may be able to help us with those. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Christy Harps of our historic district section in our planning department for the next few slides. Christy?
Thank you, Alan. My name is Christy Harpst, and I'm the program manager for the Historic District Commission. And the map you have in front of you just shows the locations of our now 7 local historic districts. Most of them are outside the 77 loop. They range from the smallest district with Hermitage Court at 37 properties to Dilworth, which is, as you can see here, much, much larger. Alan, if you would advance, please. Thank you. We've had historic districts in Charlotte since 1976. So the historic district overlay has been in place for 45 years. It started as the redevelopment of Fourth Ward in Uptown. It's a rezoning process to establish a new district. Our newest district was just added in December of 2020, Oaklawn Park. And the designation process took about 2 years. So it's not a quick process. And it is also a neighborhood-driven process. This is not, historic districts are not put in place by the city of Charlotte. It is all grassroots driven from the neighborhood who want to protect the special historic character of their districts. There are no use impacts in historic districts. It is just some additional development requirements and architectural standards. The one key that I would like to point out is at the bottom of the screen, and that there's only 983 acres within historic districts in Charlotte. That's 0.5% of Charlotte's total land area is within historic districts. So we're talking about a very, very, very small portion of the land in Charlotte that are regulated by historic district overlays. Alan, if you would move on. So with the historic district overlay, again, it's been in place for 45 years. We don't have many changes to it. Mostly the changes are bringing us into compliance with 160D. And some of the examples are, instead of having historic district guidelines for architectural review, they're being called standards. We also reorganized and consolidated other chapters of the zoning ordinance. Some of the historic district information appeared in chapters 3, chapters 4, and chapters 10, and we've consolidated that now into the historic district overlay chapter. And we also added some clarity and consistency statements that to make it very clear that historic district overlay supersedes the standards in the underlying districts. I think that's it. Yes, thank you, Alan. And the biggest impact really is the reorganization. And you can see here what our current outline was for the ordinance. All we did is reorganized it for usability. And we also broke out, so the COA required in the current, it's bullet number 2 under current. We expanded upon that in the proposed, and we just gave additional headings and information about review standards, application. All of these things exist in the current ordinance. We just organized it differently and broke it out for clarity so people using the ordinance had a better grasp of where to find the information they're looking for. Alan, next, please. Yes, sir.
Yes, I wondered before we move on to the neighborhood character overlay district,
Sure.
which are the next slides. I see that David has made a couple of comments or questions on chat, but I wonder, Laura, what do you think about maybe stopping here and seeing if the committee has any specific questions about historic district overlay before we move on to neighborhood character overlay?
I think that's a great idea. And I also hopefully answered David's first question, which was about some campuses.
Right.
I see he had a comment on the second. Yeah, I think let's go ahead and do that, Alan.
So I'll just ask if you've got any questions about what Christy just spoke about, the historic district overlay. Either put them in chat now or raise your hand and we can open up the microphone and talk, and I'll give a minute or so for you, anybody who wants to do that, to do so. And if we don't see any, then we'll move on.
Thomas, no, this revision doesn't make any changes other than organizational. There are no expanded applicability. We updated references to section 160D in state law, and we just edited some language for clarity. There are no new changes that didn't already exist in other parts of our ordinance. So you'll see specifically restoration repair of historic features on the proposed. That existed in chapter 4 of our zoning ordinance. It was adopted, I think, in 2015, and we just consolidated it here. So there's nothing new.
And then we've got a question, a general question about 160D. Will the city meet the deadline for compliance? Laura, can you say anything about compliance with 160D, or Sandy?
I'm having some internet connectivity issues, so I don't know if you can hear me, but yes, we will be operating by the July 1st deadline in compliance with 160D for anything that we need to adjust.
I didn't see, but you had answered in the chat. I hadn't seen that. Okay. I don't see any other questions coming in at this point. If you think of any, we'll obviously take more comments and questions after the presentation. So at this point, then let's move on to our next slide, and I'm going to send it back to Christy.
Thanks, Alan. So we have a new proposal for a neighborhood character district overlay, and it's because it's the missing middle piece in our zoning districts. We have your zoning ordinance, which is just your basic requirements, and then we go all the way on the other side, which is custom by neighborhood with a lot of standards and restrictions of as far as like new infill development, additions to existing buildings. And this all or nothing approach isn't working for neighborhoods that might not meet the parameters for being historic district, might not want to be. Historic districts are certainly not appropriate for every neighborhood. And so we got to thinking, what can be done to bridge this gap and help neighborhoods get a little bit more say in how they develop in the future without going as far as a local historic district. And so the neighborhood character overlay, it's very specific in what can be regulated. It's meant to reduce conflict between new construction and existing development. It's to encourage compatible infill, and it's customizable. There are a menu of options, and if a neighborhood selects to become a character overlay district, they can pick one or all. They do not have, the city is not going to say you have to do all of these things. It is completely customizable by what's important to the neighborhood. And there is no board review. It does not come to the Historic District Commission. It does not come to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. This is simply an added requirement when you go through the permit process that the zoning permit reviewers will be looking at. It's all administratively handled. Another key point, yes, thanks, Alan. Another key point is this is for already developed neighborhoods. It is not for new subdivisions. It's not for new development. It is for established neighborhoods in the city of Charlotte. And it has been outlined in our comprehensive plan. It's one of our short-term 5-year implementation strategies. And it is part of Goal 9, which is retain our identity and charm. And this is also an outcome. It made it into the comp plan. I see there are some people here who have participated in the Community Planning Academy, which the Planning Department puts on, and the Civic Leadership Academy, which is put on by the Housing and Neighborhood Services Division. And during our planning sessions, when we're sharing with the participants in these academies about how planning and zoning works in the city of Charlotte, we've gotten a lot of questions about, well, what can we do to help guide growth and development in our neighborhood that isn't a historic district? And up until now, I've had to answer, there's nothing you can do. You could get involved in the rezoning process when a rezoning occurs, but as far as by right zoning, you're very limited. So this has come forth as a request from neighborhood organizations, and it is, again, a completely customizable overlay district, and it is not being put in place by the city. It is all going to be neighborhood driven. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Arista to talk through more specifics about how the neighborhood character overlay district is organized and the designation process.
Okay. Thank you, Christy. So happy to be here this morning. And so I think some of you may remember when we were talking about Neighborhood 1 that this was one of the overlay districts that we thought would be great for those N1 districts that are in place. And you see here kind of the almost simple outline of what's in this district: purpose, applicability, what's eligible, what are the standards, how does it get approved, what happens to existing structures. And we'll kind of go through each of these to kind of have you understand how each applies. Next slide. So the purpose, Christy said it best, so I really don't want to kind of reiterate that. It's really preserving the existing character of neighborhoods, those that can't quite get to the historic district overlay and need some unique provisions on them to preserve the way that they have developed and they've been established. So what we've done is we've looked at the NCO overlay is, where would this be applicable? And as we talked about before, it was really in the N1 districts. So, and we've said the N1A through the N1D districts, those first 4 residential zoning districts that are in the UDO. Once the NCO district is established, all the new construction that comes in, additions or expansions, all need to comply with the standards that come out of the neighborhood character plan. And that neighborhood character plan is the document that's going to contain the standards that apply to that specific NCO district. Eligibility. This is kind of looking at, what are those character aspects that would establish, would create the guidelines for establishing an NCO district. And so what we're looking at is kind of one or more of the following criteria. So consistency in scale, proportion, and rhythm. These are things like lot width, building heights, front facade width, the relationship of building massing and spacing with the setbacks, which may be different from those that are established by the underlying district, and where things are placed on the lot. Looking at how the other on-site elements are, the disposition of these, whether it be where parking is located, unique aspects of landscape or tree save areas, as well as even things like accessory structures. So really looking and seeing that those things are in place that are making this area unique and qualifying it for this neighborhood character overlay. In addition, that's required. What we've looked at and proposed at this point is a minimum of 1 block face. So all the lots within that block face. Again, to emphasize that this is not for new construction, we've put a date on it of established at least 25 years prior, with 75% of the lots in that block face having been developed. And again, to keep the conflicts away, you cannot apply an NCO over an historic district overlay. It's kind of intuitive that that's the case, but we want to be clear on that you've got kind of 2 different flavors going on here, and they don't, they're not compatible with each other when zoned over the same properties. So the standards for the NCO districts, what can we control within that neighborhood character plan? And that really is the document that's going to say what the new standards that apply to this area are. So these are things like the either minimum or maximum or both lot areas, same things like lot width or frontage, looking at the setbacks, again, minimum and or maximums, the maximum heights for principal and accessory buildings, the amount of building coverage that take place here, things like surface parking, again, as we talked about, that kind of disposition of accessory structures and vehicle parking, it's kind of that plays into this part here, as well as enhanced tree planting and protection standards. So really looking at kind of how the landscape, the urban canopy has developed in these areas, and if it's unique, that it really should be brought into this NCO district. I think what's important is the non-residential development. So, you have things like schools and churches that that may be part of these character areas that are the overlay district is being applied. They would not be subject. This is really for residential development. And then again, as an overlay district, it's not making any use modifications. Those uses that are permitted in the underlying zoning district are the ones that will continue to be allowed. So the approval process. So this is really something, again, as Christy said, initiated by the neighborhood, looking at a petition by the property owners to kind of bring on this neighborhood character overlay into their neighborhood. This then goes to the planning director to look at and make a determination of if it's eligible, those standards that we talked about. Is it unique in how it's set up? Is it their uniqueness in its disposition? Are the setbacks unique? Are the building heights of a certain scale? So really making sure that it's meeting those criteria, as well as that minimum of 1 block face. Then to keep this process very transparent, it goes to a public meeting that looks at eligibility, really talking about if it is determined to be eligible for an NCO district, then it goes into a public meeting to inform people that this will be happening. Following that, it goes to a neighborhood character plan. And again, as I talked about, that would be that document that outlines which standards would apply to this specific NCO district. So each one's going to be different. Each one's going to be taking care of certain aspects of that neighborhood that really want to be preserved and kind of continued on as new development and infill occurs. Again, to be transparent, this neighborhood character plan developed by city staff would then go into a public information meeting. So people would be able to take a look at it, provide feedback, making sure that those elements that they had initially proposed way back in step 1 are really being addressed within that neighborhood character plan. And then that would go to a petition for a map amendment that would be brought before the city council. What happens then is the map amendment is coupled with the neighborhood character plan. They're adopted, they're put in place, and then those standards kind of overlay what's already in the underlying zoning and control those elements that have been outlined in the neighborhood character plan. I don't know if we want to pause or...
Yeah, I was thinking it might be. I know that we've had some comments and questions in chat that we're trying to keep up with. So this may be a good time to pause and see if we get a couple of more of those coming in. And again, as I said earlier, if we don't get to your comments on the neighborhood character overlay, or if you think of any between now and the end of our presentation, we will stop at the end and we can go back and talk about them. So there's some discussion about what gets regulated. And Philip, I think, was correct in stating that this wouldn't decide how your house would look, but it may alter the parameters about setbacks and height and so forth. It could do that if that's one of the things the neighborhood wants included.
So I have a good example to answer Thomas's question, which I think is really a great question, very fair. And for everyone's benefit, Thomas asked if we're mostly talking about, just the box new construction fits in. Why is the new ordinance not sufficient to address these items, and a whole new section is needed? So the ordinance is very broadly focused on these items, and a good example would be maybe I'm not saying they have approached us or anything. Say the Cloisters, the Cloister neighborhood. It's all mid-century modern ranch houses. And say they want to come to us and it's really important to them that height and lot setback are the two things they want to preserve in their neighborhood. So this neighborhood character plan would look at the average setbacks in the neighborhood, which are likely deeper than what are required by the general zoning ordinance. And we'd also look at the average heights, and we'd work with the neighborhood, and maybe these houses are 23 feet tall. Well, the new zoning ordinance allows 40-foot tall single family residential. And this would be a way to make sure that a 40-foot tall new house isn't being put in next to in this whole neighborhood of 23-foot tall ranch houses. So it just allows for more specificity and customization for individual neighborhoods.
And I think, Christy, just to reinforce, this is a couple of things. This is by a large amount of residents or property owners in the neighborhood. So
right.
It's where they want that customization. And I think also it is not intended, stress this, to keep people from doing different housing types.
Right.
So there's nothing in there that will deal with uses. It is really about, and it's not even about probably all sides of the box. It's more focused on the front of the box and maybe the side of the box and lot widths and so forth. Not intended to disallow duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes on arterials.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, I can see that there's some concern about how this may conflict with some of our other goals to provide density and additional housing. And I think, as Laura just said, you wouldn't be able to use this overlay district to restrict, for example, new residential to only single family. Because if duplexes were allowed in the underlying zoning district, they would be allowed under the overlay, as well as whatever other residential uses would be allowed. Okay, I think we're going to move on to our next few districts, and then we can stop at that point and continue our discussion and respond to some of the questions and comments that we are receiving. So Arista, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Okay. So the next two districts that we're looking at are the manufactured home districts. And the first is the manufactured home overlay district. And this is a relatively simple overlay. You can see here four sets of standards: purpose, applicability, uses, and prescribed conditions. And the issue here is, and so as an overlay, this would lay over a current residential zoning district. So it could potentially allow for a mix of, regular built, building code constructed single family homes with manufactured homes mixed in together. One of the things here is we're being very clear about what defines a manufactured home, both using HUD standards as well as what is in 160D, talking about the standards for manufactured homes. So as you can see here, I'm not going to read through this. And I think some of you may remember when we went through uses that we had talked about this, kind of how it's very specifically defined that it's built to HUD code as opposed to building code. Next slide, please. And that there's a difference between manufactured and modular. And again, this was something that may be familiar to many of you who are here during our use discussions. Modular homes and modular buildings are a type of construction. We're not grouping them in with manufactured homes. I know the terms can be confusing, but we're trying to be very clear within the definitions because modular homes have to comply with all the zoning requirements as well as the local building code requirements. So the purpose is to look at allowing for, with an overlay district, manufactured homes within select N1 districts. Similar to what we looked at the neighborhood character overlay, it's the N1B through the N1D districts. What we want to do is make sure that this is done kind of not on a little lot by lot basis, but that there's some significance to applying this overlay district, and that's making it a contiguous area at this time proposed to be 5 acres in size. So it's really allowing for that mix of dwelling types, including manufactured homes in a significant area. And then manufactured home dwellings really on the uses, what it's doing is enhancing the use structure of the underlying district by permitting manufactured homes within the overlay district boundaries. There are some prescribed conditions that come along with the manufactured home dwelling, and I think some of them are on the next slide. They are. And so as you can see, there's some very standard ones that talk about, removing the wheels and the axles, making sure there's only one per lot, that it's set up in compliance with the North Carolina Department of Insurance. But then we've kind of looked at the Fannie Mae Manufactured Home Advantage standards and saw in this district where we're getting a mix of dwelling types, that those kind of compatibility things that they've talked about within that funding program, some of those aspects have been brought in here. Others are not really applicable to a zoning ordinance. It's nothing that we have in here would prevent you from complying with all of those. Many of those get into the interior. It's just that we wanted to pull out the ones that really talked about design. So you see here, when you're doing the overlay district, again, that mix of dwelling types, we're asking for a double wide or larger manufactured home. There's a roof pitch of 412. Again, that comes out of the Fannie Mae Advantage standards. Some required design features. There's kind of a menu of what you would want to kind of break up the facade of that manufactured home. And some standards, again, coming from the Fannie Mae standards, the exterior siding requirements, what would be required on the outside of any manufactured home within the overlay district. The second one is one that you may be more familiar in kind of everybody's head. It's the idea of the manufactured home park. This is a specific base district. This is a special purpose base district. It's not an overlay, and it's really intended for covering manufactured home parks. And so you see, we've got the standards again laid out, purpose, the uses that are allowed, what are the standards for the park, what are the standards for the individual home stands within the park, and what are some standards for the manufactured home that sits on there. And this is kind of less intensive than the overlay district, kind of just acknowledging the existing character of what manufactured home parks look like. So as you can see here, again, kind of as I talked about, manufactured home park is the parcel of land, either under single control or unified ownership, that is planned and improved for the placement of manufactured homes. And then when we say manufactured home stand, that's basically that portion of land allotted to your manufactured home that it sits on within the manufactured home park. So the purpose, I feel kind of like I'm repeating myself, but it's okay. It's to accommodate manufactured home parks. And the uses that would be allowed would be per the use table. And primarily, these are very basic things. It's obviously the manufactured home dwelling. It could be things like utilities, which is key, and then things like parks. So that's really what falls into this standard. So the next slide. So you'll see here, there's kind of two separate standards that are in place here, dimensional standards. The first is for the manufactured home park as as a whole. And if you remember somewhere, we've talked about minimum and maximum district sizes before. So that's really what we're dealing with here. Rather, we're saying the minimum area for this district to be applied would be 2 acres to a maximum of 40 acres, a required minimum district lot width, and that would be essentially what's covering your manufactured home park. And then surrounding the outside of the manufactured home park along the perimeter would be some setbacks. You see them here, 30 feet as measured from the property line, to provide some buffering and screening along the edge of the manufactured home park. In addition, some standards for how that park is designed. We've said 10% of the total area to be devoted to recreational facilities for use of the residents. And in addition, because of the kind of access network within, looking at internal access drives of 20 feet in width. Next slide, please. Oh, it is, okay. So the next is the homestand. So these are the manufactured homestands within the park. And this is where you would be placing your manufactured home. So these can be as small as you see here, our minimum stand area is, 2,000 square feet. So it's a relatively small area, 20 feet in width. A manufactured home height, the maximum height of 24 feet, some separation requirements between the homes, and then some setbacks, that front setback being measured from those internal access drives, the edge of those, as well as some side and rear setback. Again, allowing only one manufactured home per stand, that they have to front on this internal access drive, and that there be a sidewalk that connects, from the driveway of a detached garage or carport to the door or to the attached porch of the home. So you have that kind of connection that's going between the home, between where you would park a car and where the manufactured home is located. The standards for these are lesser than what we looked at in the overlay district. Again, some of these probably seem very familiar to you. The area beneath the home has to be fully skirted. This is, really to put some durable skirting there within 60 days of placement. Again, the wheels, the axles, all of that needs to be removed. And then the manufacturing home needs to be at least 12 feet in width along the majority of its length. So they're kind of very basic standards for the manufactured homes. I don't know if we just want to finish off with the airport. It's pretty simple. Should I just go? I'm going to go. So the last special purpose district, which is an overlay district, is the ANDO, the Airport Noise Overlay District. This is a very simple overlay district. Essentially what we're asking here, it's a disclosure. Where this lays down requires a disclosure to residential property owners that, hey, you're by the airport and you're going to hear flights and aircraft noise going over your house. And it's really to make sure that people are aware of when they're purchasing a property or looking at a property that this is going to go on. These are all established through kind of these maps that exist outside of the zoning ordinance, the combined noise exposure map, noise compatibility program, noise contours, which hopefully the airport representative can answer any questions on that one. And essentially what happens is that there's a disclosure notice that's posted on the property that it is zoned this district, that it is near the noise exposure areas of the Charlotte Douglas Airport, and that you may hear things that are unpleasant, but to be aware that you are within the boundaries of the airport and there may be noise. And that's really all that goes on within the ANDO district.
Thank you, Arista. We are at a point now in our presentation where we can stop and circle back for any questions you may have on anything that we've covered. We've covered all 5 of these overlay and special purpose districts. So that really concludes our prepared presentation. And I see that we've been trying to keep up with comments in the chat box, but now would be a time if you want to chime in either vocally using your microphone or entering questions or comments in chat. We've got time now to dig into some of those things. Laura or Chris, do we have any questions that we haven't been able to answer that we want to bring out into the open and have a discussion about?
Wait, scrolling back, thank you.
Yeah, looks like you've been keeping up pretty well with, if we're not answering, at least other people in the committee are answering each other. So that's always nice to see too.
Laura, can I just ask a simple follow-up on the campuses for my.
Sure.
When you say, because I was, looking at, I've lost your answer, but you basically said there's a district that handles places like UNCC and Atrium. Are they specially tailored to each of those different large institutions, or is there an overall sort of special campus district? Because whether it's a hospital or a university, that may not be terribly different. I know one's got ambulances and the other doesn't, but in terms of circulation logic, security, et cetera, spaces between buildings, there's a lot of commonality.
And David, that's a great question. We actually have 3 campus districts, but one is office focused. So we'll take that one off the table for this discussion, but for our institutional campuses, so we don't have a campus, an educational campus. We just have campuses, and we have, it's been a while since we talked about it. So we've given you guys a lot. You'll see all of this in writing, but we have what we call an urban campus, which is where Atrium would fit in. And then I think we'd have to look and see what UNC Charlotte would fit in, but we have
increasingly urban, as we know. I mean,
right. And it could even be that parts of it, I think we have to work through that, and we'll have to look at it. We have some like medical campuses that are kind of in the further out parts of our community, which might have a little bit different standards, a little bit lesser height.
I'll shut up after this one other thing. I mean, CPCC is different again. That's just urban, period. So it's got all the sort of normal urban conditions you'd have in a mixed-use neighborhood. And in fact, it sits in a mixed-use neighborhood. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm not against any of this. I'm just looking for clarity, because it's one of the issues I'm used to wrestling with. And we've got, Atrium is different from UNCC, which is different from CPCC. And then you've got office parks, which are different again, as you say. So I'm glad to hear that the team is perhaps revisiting some of this, seeking, clarity. Because, I mean, UNCC, for example, I've been involved in the development plans there for a long time. And they've got their own logic. And there's no reason for the city to get involved in that. Other than building code, I guess. So things, but whereas CPCC, because it's right there making streets, is a different condition. Anyway, I'll just leave that out there and shut up. Thanks for your time.
Thank
you. Laura, we've had a couple of people suggest that maybe we need to go back to Rebecca's question, and I think it's the comment or question from 12:01 p.m. And I think we're going back to the neighborhood character overlay district. Could this be used, this overlay district, by some perhaps wealthier neighborhoods to work against some of the comprehensive plan goals, such as density, et cetera? I think I spoke a little bit, and you did too, about you would not be able to use this to restrict the kind of residential development that you could build in those districts. If you could build a duplex under the underlying district, you could also, you could build one with the overlay as well. And this is a goal of I think this addresses one of the goals of the comp plan, which is to preserve our neighborhood character. But anybody have any thoughts about, and I'm asking our staff team and consultants, any other way that we want to maybe talk about this issue? Because I think this could come up in the community as we go further down the road.
I just want to go back and reiterate. We wrote this and tried to develop this very intentionally to not conflict with the goals for diversity of housing in our neighborhoods. It is a balance between a number of priorities. Certainly want to respect for those neighborhoods that as a group majority of the neighborhood feel it's important to preserve their character, to allow them to do that, but to evolve with the different housing types at the same time. So we're really trying to balance those two goals. And we'll look forward to hearing from you guys as we send the draft out next week to see if you think we've done that.
If I can add, it's also a planning process, in developing the neighborhood character area plan. It's not something that one or two neighbors are going to say, this is what we want for our neighborhood, and this is what we're going to do. It requires the buy-in from the neighborhood or the portion of the neighborhood that this would go over. And it's also based on existing characteristics of the neighborhood. So it can't be, it needs to make logical sense. Like a neighborhood that's full of, 2-3-story houses can't all of a sudden say, we're done with those. We don't want any more of those coming in our neighborhood. And so in order to restrict density, we're going to say the height needs to be limited to 20 feet. Like it needs to be based on what's on the ground in the neighborhood.
And
go ahead, Laura.
I would even just add that I'm going to disagree a little bit with what Thomas has said, because some of our neighborhoods in town, we do have one-story duplexes. So you might be able to do some things even with existing structures. I mean, there's some code issues you deal with that allow you to split them into 2 different units. If they're like a larger ranch house, for example. So we really see a lot of flexibility. And again, it's a balance. But it's the difference between having a character of maybe a neighborhood that are 1.5 story and saying, really, that's the predominant character and that's what we want to preserve. And again, the neighborhood saying that.
Apparently a minority of the neighborhood, though. What was it, 25%?
No, not for, I don't know, Christy, if you have off the top of your head, for the text amendment to be filed.
It's a minimum of 51% of the area included in the overlay. And that's the minimum. And how I've always recommended people as it relates to historic districts is you need to get input and agreement from as many people as possible, because it will just cause you problems down the road if you don't.
And just to clarify too, the 25%, it's 25% of the land area and 25% of the lots. That's just to initiate the plan process. That's not actually to approve it and get it applied.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. We've got a couple of, let's go to Eric's comment at 12:13 if you're playing along at home. Do we always have to use a minimum square footage on lots? And Eric, I think maybe you were talking about the manufactured home park overlay when you made that comment or question. Combined with minimum lot width confines options on things. Care to expound on that?
Yeah, just going over both neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 the last 2 weeks, and then going into this meeting, just that square footage, minimums are really confining, and comparing it to some other areas too that are doing some codes that I was looking at. So I've been looking at South Bend, Indiana, and their minimums are like 1,200 square feet. With a minimum.
Are you talking about for a manufactured home?
I mean, it could apply to that. I mean, if you look at what the minimum was for the manufacturing home, I think that was what,
it was
20 feet?
It was 2,000 square feet, a minimum lot size, and that's
right. 2,000 with the minimum of 20.
Yeah, our current standard, by the way, is 5,000. So we've reduced that quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm just talking about maybe reducing it a little bit more, or I don't know. Some places don't use square footage; they just use a minimum of lot width and depth.
Yeah,
I mean that does translate into a square footage. It's redundant, but just trying to figure that out a little bit, because I'm just concerned in all of them that we are not utilizing our land efficiently. If we have these bigger square, I mean, in the residential, it's all what, 3,500 is the smallest square footage. So
yeah,
it just, that I think we need to, you know, maybe, you know, with housing shortages, that may have to be relooked at. I would love everybody else's thoughts on it too.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a question about that, Alan. So on this manufactured houses, do you have to have an individual lot for a house, or can it be a single parcel with either condoed out or one large parcel that's all owned by some other entity?
Okay, which district, Thomas? The manufactured home park or the overlay that goes into an N1 neighborhood?
The manufactured.
The park.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, the definition for the home park was under single ownership, and then the home stands were the sublots, if you will, within the park. If your question is, can I own my own home stand within a manufactured home park? I think the way it's written now, the answer would be no, but I don't know that that's necessarily what we would want. Did I capture your question?
You can condo out the stands if you wanted to.
Okay, so but you still have to establish lot lines even if you condoed them out.
Alan,
yeah,
regarding
you have to establish the individual stands, basically the lot lines for each individual stand, but how those are owned, whether those are rented or condoed out, you know, I've seen kind of those vacation manufactured home parks. We don't address. That's not our purview. We don't address that.
That's my question.
Do
do we need to have that? So could it not just be set up that it doesn't have individual sublots?
Alan, let me make a couple of comments on that, if you don't mind. We have traditionally had two different types of manufactured housing communities. We had what you might refer to as a mobile home park owned by an entity who then rents out spaces to individuals, either with mobile homes already there or spaces they can bring their own mobile home into. We've also had what were called mobile home subdivisions, which were essentially equivalent to a single family subdivision with public streets and individual lots that people would purchase and bring their own manufactured housing unit onto. It would seem to me that one set of standards should be adequate to cover both, but I agree with Thomas that it needs to be clear that if you want to own the land under your home, there is a means by which that could be accomplished.
Or the converse, if you wanted to do more of a rental community that couldn't be converted in the future and you wanted to do it on a single parcel, you could go that way. And that gives a greater flexibility, because my mind immediately goes here to the tiny house kind of concept. You know, if you're trying to provide these things on, so the problem with lots is always that you have to have a street going to them. And that's why I'm kind of fighting this a little bit, because there are ways to do development that doesn't require a street in front of your house. And tiny home communities are very good at that, where they consolidate parking in certain areas, but the houses don't necessarily front on them. So that's where I'm kind of always leery of lot requirements, because the subtext of that is that you're going to have a street in front of each one of these things. And I think that's more of a vehicular oriented use than we really need to be moving forward in this city.
I think you're right in that the way we've set this up, that each mobile home stand would have to front, if not on a street, on an internal driveway. But if you remember a couple of meetings ago when we were talking about the N1 districts, I think it was maybe either in October or November, we have a cottage court overlay that could accommodate things like tiny homes, that each lot wouldn't necessarily have to front a street, and you could have common parking areas and the common open space. And that might be a more appropriate district or overlay district to use for the kind of thing that I think you're trying to describe.
Well, what I'm saying though is, if it's good enough for that district, why make it that you have to go to that district to be done? Why not let it be in this district as well? Because at some point the city is going to apply these things across parcels, so that's just forcing rezoning from one use to another that may or may not get supported. So I'm just trying to get uniformity before the districts, because fronting on greenways and open space, that's a good idea, and it shouldn't be restricted to one kind of zoning or another if it can be kind of provided for.
Okay.
My 2 cents, I'll stop.
Yeah, we've got a lot of messages to catch up with. And yes, I'm sorry, Stuart, we got carried away. Before you go, Stuart, if you're still here, I know that Brent had a couple of questions that you might be able to help with. And Brent, going back, sorry to skip around, to 12:17. Stuart, are you still with us? I know you said you had to jump off at 12:30.
I am, Alan, for a couple more minutes. I can welcome the chance to participate. And to clarify, the geography of the Airport Noise Disclosure Overlay District is defined by a federal process. And so the noise exposure map is a computed geography. It's a map that's created by the being within the 65 day-night level, which is a measurement of noise exposure. And anything within that 65 contour would be part of the ANDO. Now, that geography is very close to the airport. That is right off the ends of the runways, and does not extend much further than less than a mile off the ends of runways. Does not extend east-west from the airport much, just because of the way that the noise is modeled with this. And that's consistent with a federal definition of noise exposure. Other communities have expanded that definition. Minneapolis has a 60 DNL disclosure, and it would be taking on additional liability, because we are obligated to noise insulate or acquire properties that are within that defined areas according to the federal process. And so trying to mirror a defined federal process with this overlay, that's where the 65 DNL is used to create these noise exposure maps. And that's why it is really just, we're talking about the homes that are just north and south of the airport. We would not be getting into South Park or Mountain Island Lake or some of the neighborhoods that do have noise exposure, but don't meet that definition.
Thanks, Stuart. Brent, does that answer your question, Brent, if you're available?
Yeah. I just, people have been raising issues. Even over here in Stonehaven, people started talking about airport noise. I figured out finally that it was Allegiant planes going into Concord that we might hear, once a month due to conditions. But I suspected what Stuart said was correct. I just wanted everybody to know, so that if somebody starts to say, well, hey, the planes are coming over South Park now, we need to expand this. So it's a very narrow corridor everywhere. It's not that you guys are, refusing to recognize noise 10 miles from the airport. So.
And
Alan,
yes.
Alan, can I ask a question again? Maybe Arista and Christy, run down the list of the things that the character district can include, please.
I can go back to that slide, but before I do that, Walter, I just wanted to, before Stuart has to sign off from the airport, okay. I won't lose your question, but I know I see it there. And Philip had a question about whether this ANDO district replaces the existing airport overlay district. And it does in part. The current airport overlay district had two parts. One was an airport overlay and the other was the airport noise overlay. This ANDO district replaces the current airport noise overlay district. We are not going to have a general airport overlay district, which is, if you're at all familiar with that, it's got a funny bowl-shaped diagram that talks about imaginary spaces around the runways and what can be built to what height if you're within a certain area around. It's been pointed out to us that those kind of standards should apply on a citywide basis. And so instead of an airport overlay district that regulates height, for example, within glide planes or glide slopes, I'm probably not using the right terminology, and Stuart, if you're still here, you can correct me. We're going to put those standards into the general development standards of the zoning ordinance. So they would apply on a citywide basis rather than just within a mapped overlay district.
Alan, I think you did a great job in explaining that, because it is important that we do acknowledge it for towers going uptown, for radio beacons going out near the university, that all of those do relate to a federal process as well.
Yes, thank you. And it's a requirement to notify the FAA that you're building a structure of a certain height, and then the FAA will tell you whether or not you're going to be in conflict with flight operations and whether or not they're going to have to make any modifications to get around the tall structure that you're proposing to build.
So we'll be eliminating the old conical surfaces type definitions and going to a straight overall airspace type definition. I recall that when the B of A tower was built, it actually infringed on the elevations in that area, and there had to be an alteration of the flight paths. So
yeah, I think that's correct, Walter. We may or may not have a diagram in that, but it is a written, it's defined in writing what those surfaces are, and so that will be part of the ordinance, or at least referenced somehow. You're correct. Anywhere within our jurisdiction, if you build to a certain height, the requirement is that you notify the FAA, and then the FAA will decide whether they need to do anything in response to what you're proposing. And it may be altering flight operations. Did I say that right, Stuart?
Alan, yes, you did. That is exactly what we want the local regulatory authority to do. That's kind of an obligation, is that we control our own zoning, and that FAA doesn't enforce that. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Thank you. And Stuart, I'm sorry I know you have to leave, and so I appreciate your hanging around and answering questions.
Thanks for your time. Look forward to anything offline. Y'all have a great day.
Okay, thanks. And
Alan, just
yes, are you back?
Quick, yeah, I've in and out on internet, but did we clarify that the height standards will be for airport related will be in general development, that they won't be in this overlay?
Yes, I did say that. Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been in and out. Just didn't look for it when they get these drafts.
No worry. And Laura, if you're back and connected, would you mind moderating for the next couple of minutes while I take a quick break?
I can try. I need to know where you stopped, and I'm spotty on internet.
Let me, before that, I wanted to go back because I promised Walter we would go back and talk about the types of standards that can be regulated with the neighborhood character overlay district. So they're on the slide that should be on your screen right now. In number 1, A through G.
okay, thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
So Alan, what time had you gotten to?
Well, let's see, we've been skipping around a little bit because I wanted to cover airport before Stuart had to leave. And so let me see if I can figure out where we left off. Maybe pick up at 12:25, Jim Merrifield's comments at 12:25, and I think we're still talking about the neighborhood character overlay district, and Jim, jump in if we got that wrong, but I think that's probably where we should go back to.
Okay, I'm at 12:25. The plan, the character plan, I think Jim asked, I believe that's the question, and that would be prepared by staff. So based on that initial request and depending on staff resources as far as the timing of that goes. Christy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, that's correct. It's in close coordination with the neighborhood, of course.
Yeah, yes, not independently, but with the
No.
neighborhood.
Yeah, we're just the implementers of what the neighborhood wants. So the technical resource.
Jim is saying that the district should require more than a simple majority. I think
so,
as we ask for comments back from the OAC, like to see what others think, so we kind of see across the board how folks are feeling about that.
Absolutely. And to provide a little bit of context, we looked at all the cities in North Carolina that currently have a character overlay district on the books, and all of them from Raleigh to Greensboro had that 51%. And so we were trying to be consistent with what the standard practice is across the board, but we're of course open to suggestions. I think the one discussion, Laura, that we had internally was what happens, say it's a block of 10 houses and one person owns five of them, and that the rest of the neighbors are all about this. And we settled on the 51% because we didn't want to give one person the power to kill it for the neighborhood. So that was part of the thought process and discussion we had back and forth too, because those percentages were something we really looked at. But we are, of course, glad to take comments.
Great to hear.
This is Jim. Can you hear me?
Hi, Jim. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So back the first question about who pays for it. If staff is paying for it, I just think you could be deluged with these things, and it seems like a big burden on the public to respond to neighbors. And I don't know how it would seem like this ought to be an overwhelming sort of desire, not fractured groups that get onto something. And if you're down to as I understood it, a single block, meaning one frontage along one street, I mean, that could be just an unbelievable burden of the amount of these things, both from implementing them and processing them. So I just think it seems overwhelming. It'd be interesting to know other examples of other communities that have done this and how it's worked, but it seems like it could really create a lot of fracturing and a lot of angst and a lot of costs. And I don't know who's paying for all that. Eventually the public's paying for it. And it seems misguided to me.
Jim, we talked about that too. The deluge concern is definitely something we've discussed a lot, both with Camiris and with internal staff. Looking across the state, Raleigh has had this in place since the 80s, and they're the ones that have the most conservation districts. I think they have 17 or 18. But again, that's been since the 1980s. Most cities have one or two. But you're right, Charlotte's different, and especially with the wide range, we do know there's may be a problem as far as being inundated with requests, and we will likely have to come up with some way of sorting those and prioritizing. So, Laura, anything else you want to add about that?
No, thank you, Christy. Again, we'd like to hear. We send out a survey after these meetings. We'd like to hear from what you guys think. I think Jim brings up some interesting points and kind of like to see if others are in the same place. They have different perspectives that we're not thinking, so that would be really helpful for us.
Laura, it's Eric. I had a quick question about defining who's voting in the process. Is it only the parcels of the folks involved? Is it the neighborhood association? Just the parcels, but the neighborhood associations you would be working with at some point as well with this when it's contained inside their jurisdiction, well, in their area?
Certainly during the informational meetings, I think we'd have to talk about kind of how that works with the actual plan development meetings, but there, you know, number of informational meetings. There's also the council hearing, but I mean, I know that the neighborhoods will be involved. I don't want to make it sound like they won't. I think, you know, there's some procedural things that maybe don't go in the ordinance, so we'll still have to think through how we make all of that work.
Laura, along that same line, the first item talks about minimum and or maximum lot area. Does that suggest that if I happen to own a piece of property within this overlay district that was 2 or 3 times the size of the already platted lots, that my ability to subdivide my land consistent with the underlying zoning lot dimensions could be thwarted by one of these districts?
Could you, so if the character overlay sets a minimum that is higher than or has different standards than the underlying district, those of the character overlay would override.
Okay, so if my lot could be divided into lots which are consistent with or generally consistent with the size of the other lots in the area covered by that district, then I would be able to do that.
If consistent with the standards, and the standards would be based on what is on the ground in the neighborhoods.
Oh, okay, thank you, thank you.
Let's see, Eric, you had a question about, I think it was back to Cottage Court, but I'm not sure. You said, could it front a multi-use path?
That was with the mobile manufactured park homes, and Thomas was making the point that that lots would assume to front streets, and I was just making the point that could that definition be used to include multi-use paths instead too?
Right, and I think again we have the 2 districts, and one of them really is more of your main park, and you don't necessarily, and I'm going to let Arista and Chris correct me if I'm saying that's wrong, from don't necessarily have to front a street. So there's more flex. Go ahead.
For the park you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. What we initially had proposed when we were kind of drafting this out was looking at it as internal access drives. There's nothing to say that that internal access drive couldn't also be a multi-use path. We just have to take a look at that and kind of see how that would play out with the standards that are in place. But I don't see an issue with taking that into consideration.
Thank you, Eric. Scrolling down. The Cottage Court. I think David's question about Cottage Court, a courtyard, and yes, all the, well, Chris answered that, I believe.
Yeah, Chris and I got all of that. We were,
yeah, both of y'all did. So yeah.
I'm a happy camper.
Okay, good. Let's see. Thomas, I'm not sure what your comment is. I have some lovely examples of the good way to design these. I'm assuming you're talking about Cottage Court again. And then,
oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm scrolling through Cottage Court. On to yeah, and I think we come down to David's comment at 12:38 about the helicopters and so forth at Atrian. And yes, the zone, I'll just go back to reiterate, the zoning ordinance is going to cover the sound out at the airport. Beyond that is with plane noise and other noise. With the caveat that as you look at where, I'm seeing that David doesn't concern about this, but as people look at where we allow helistops, if you think that there are standards that we should look at, please let us know. And finally, Eric, could you talk, I think it's the last question we have, talk about building standards, them to building types. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I was noticing that instead of going just by generic, where the building, with building standards, like I mentioned above in there, just South Bend was tying those to different building types, which then really kind of set, you know, each of those building types and how they were being built made more sense than just kind of leaving it very general. I don't know if we could tie that. I know it's not been done anywhere. I don't believe in any of the ordinance, but just general talk about that, I guess.
Yes.
I saw South Bend's ordinance and it immediately became very familiar. We did an ordinance like that for Buffalo. It's basically the whole city's done under a form-based code. And essentially what you do is create a menu of building types. I believe, Chris, jump in if I remember the number wrong. I think it's something like we had something like a dozen different building types that then get tied back into the zoning districts and permissions, and then different standards for the different types of buildings. So it's a very different approach than what we're doing here. It's more strict in a number of ways because it's very form-based and it's tied to these specific types of buildings. So it's a kind of a different kind of code approach. So that's all.
My question is yeah, is there any way to hybrid that a little bit to fit in here when needed in certain districts?
I mean, the issue would be is what building types are you trying to control rather than just kind of looking at the approach. If there's something specific you want to control about the way a certain type of building is designed, then we have to, you know, then we can maybe look at that, but it's got to be in response to something. It can't just be. So in many things like in Buffalo, when we looked at that, like when you do things with residential housing, there's a lot we're limited by state law in North Carolina that we can't touch.
Right. But it would be, like, for instance, like townhomes, things we can do in North Carolina, just to give a little greater clarification, to pull those out, say like in the N1 districts, to help clarify those.
To say townhomes, again, are treated as single family, so they're very restricted in terms of the design standards that we can impose. Like, we can't even tell you where you can put your garage door. Not allowed to do that, which is kind of one of the main features you'd like to do with the townhome. So again, we're very kind of restricted there. I think if you look at the standards that we've put in place, it almost is like it's tied to building types. As you look through the N2 in particular, or the N1, we've got specific standards for quadruplex, triplex, duplex, whatever we can do within the confines of what the law is allowing us to do. So that approach is kind of worked in there to a certain degree.
Yeah. And I would just say too, you know, I think we're taking it kind of as far as we can, given the guidance that we're taking out of the place types as well. You know, the place types aren't really going too far in depth in terms of something like building types to give us that foundation to build upon. So, you know, we're kind of differentiating based on our experience and as far as we can go and what we know about what we can do in North Carolina based on the design aesthetic stuff. But, you know, we haven't gone sort of full on building types and you know, that doesn't really provide the flexibility oftentimes that we're kind of looking for. So.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to jump in here because we're getting close to 1 o'clock when we'd like to get you out of here, and we've got a couple of other issues to talk about. So, Laura, do you want to take the rest of this?
Sure. Again, I think we talked about this last time, and we want to stress again, your feedback is really important. We capture a fair amount through the meetings, but if you have a point and you want to make sure, absolutely sure, you know exactly what we're going to do with it, and want a written response and clarity, the online written comments from the survey tool that we send out after virtually every meeting are the way to go. So we will be sending out another survey next week. I will say that at this point in time, we have received comments from 3 OAC members on what we sent out from the last meeting. So just a reminder of that, to go back and do that. And we'll be sending out the text of these districts along with that. So look for that by middle of next week. Our next meeting is March 11th to discuss parking and landscape standards. So that's where we go from here. And here is our schedule that we will move through with you guys through until the public draft. And then after the public draft is out, we will continue. We'll want to talk to you guys about when do you want to have meetings? What do you want to talk about? How do we continue to have the conversation, and also let you know what we're hearing in public comments. So you can see things get a little bit faster, because as we've been trying to crank out zoning on one end, we've still been working on subdivision, streets and infrastructure, and natural resources components on the other. And so we will be having a number of meetings in March, April, and May to go through those different components. And I can say with certainty for subdivision, streets, and infrastructure, we will also have some optional meetings, and we'll probably do the same thing for that want to dig in a little bit more than we have time to go through in an hour and a half on those pieces. But we know that some people are interested in kind of the nitty-gritty details more than others, and we want to give time for that. We're working towards having a full zoning and subdivision, streets, and infrastructure in early April, and then late May, a full public draft of the UDO.
Laura,
yes.
just a quick question. You answered this question for me on the chat a while ago, and Christy also mentioned it. The compliance with 160D updates, is that text also in the works, and will that be available for review fairly soon?
I think we need to go back and talk to the attorney's office about kind of how we roll that out. And that's something that we're talking about. We're really focused right now on getting the UDO, confirming it's compliant. But I'll follow up with you, Walter, on that other piece.
Okay, I mean, I know that the new ordinance will be compliant, because that just makes the most sense. But I know that also, I don't think there's anything controversial about the compliance requirements under 160D, but based on the normal schedule for rezonings, if that's going to be done in a timely fashion, I would think that the application for that and the text would be available fairly soon.
Yeah, we'll follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we are about at the end of our time. Tony, do you want to, or Allison, maybe, if you're available, want to just kind of send us off?
Just thank everybody. Great meeting. Well done. Very interesting. Very engaging. I continue to be so impressed with all the work that everybody's doing. Thank you very much. Allison?
Thanks, Tony. Thank you for your leadership. I appreciate all your comments today. And as you can see from the schedule, we've got a couple very, very busy months ahead. And so I want to say thank you for your time. Please utilize that tool that Laura mentioned with the survey and providing your comments to us that way. I think that's really the preferred way to do it. But we also, of course, are documenting all the things that we discussed in the chat and incorporating those thoughts and feedback as well. So thank you again, and we will see you on, I guess the next time is March 11th. Is that right, Alan?
Yes, March 11th.
March 11th. All right. So thank you, and look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.